Happy Thanksgiving, where we live. I'm your host, Catherine Shen. This week, we're replaying some of our favorite conversations with foodies because, let's face it, part of the joy of the holiday season is all about the delicious treats. This hour, you'll hear our conversation with Piet Despain. She's a member of the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. She also has Mexican-American roots, and both play an important role in influencing her cooking. Despain was the winner of the Gordon Ramsay's reality TV competition Next Level Chef in 2022. And later, we move from the savory to the sweet. You'll hear from Dorie Greenspan, celebrated cookbook author and all-around baking extraordinaire. She'll help you inspire your next favorite dessert. Listening back to these episodes, I'm reminded of the power of food to connect us, to celebrate milestones, and to comfort us this time of year. Enjoy. So, Piet, I would love to start sort of in the beginning with your name, which is a nickname, right? Let us know, what does it mean and where did the name come from?
Oh, first of all, Bojo, Piet Witmokwe, and Dishnakash Mashkotini, Bodawadami Indao. Hello, my name is Piet, and yes, Piet is a shorter name for Piet Witmokwe. It's my indigenous given name that was passed down through generations of lineage, so this name stays within my family. And at birth, I was given the name Stephanie. And throughout my early adulthood years, I really reconnected. I wouldn't say reconnected because I was never apart from my heritage, but I dove in and leaned into my indigeneity, and I started going by Piet for short for Piet Witmokwe.
Well, and we'll definitely go deeper into that story arc throughout this hour. So I guess just kind of give us a little bit of your background. Tell us about your childhood. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, definitely. I was born in Oklahoma, and I was born during a chapter of my mother reconnecting to her indigenous family and her Native American side. Her biological mother lived in Oklahoma at the time. And so I was born during that chapter in Oklahoma and raised in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, which is on the Osage Reservation. So I was there until I was about 6 years old. I mean, I'd gone back and forth between Kansas City and Pawhuska, Oklahoma, pretty much my whole life after that. And so I grew up kind of in both places, and so grew up in the Midwest girl through and through. And my childhood was really spent in this, multicultural family where on my dad's side, we're Mexican American. My mother's side, we're, Native American. And she was also adopted by a Mexican man and a Croatian woman. Although I didn't get to meet my mom's adopted mother. She passed when my mother was 15. But I grew up with a lot of, Native American and Mexican, not just like the food, but the culture and the music and the dancing and just that lively cultural background. And so that was my upbringing. And so that's really something that I love to lean in on as an adult, and just it's a part of my my everyday life. And so food was always at the center of all of that, which has obviously led me to being a chef. But at the time, I didn't really see food being a career choice.
Mm-hmm. Well,
we all just love food.
Right. I mean, it's the universal language, right? One of the universal languages. How can you not love food? Kind of needed to survive, but also to thrive, right? And I mean, growing up straddling multiple cultures, you mentioned that you really started to lean in as an adult. Were you able to do that when you were growing up as a kid? Or did you have a moment where you realized that you love all of it or you don't love all of it?
Yeah, growing up, we didn't have a lot of ceremony foods. We were just able to cook whatever all the Americans were eating, which was like hot dogs and hamburgers and things that you were able to, the Easy Macs and the things that you were finding in the grocery stores. But when it came to really leaning into it within the food space, if you take the food away, leaning into what we have as our traditions. And as a community, my mother, she worked at the Kansas City Indian Center, which exposed me to a lot of other tribal nations that aren't in our immediate area. I didn't do lots of traveling when I was younger. So having representation of different tribes in these events that all these community members were coming together, that really opened my eyes up to a lot of, versatility in Native American cuisine. So at ceremonies, when you would find those specialty foods that you wouldn't normally find in your day-to-day kitchen. So it would be, your corn soup or fry bread, or you would see squash and beans highlighted in a very beautiful way during ceremony. But it wasn't until I got older that I really started leaning into finding more of those foods that are, what else do we have besides fry bread? What else do we have besides this and that? And that's where I kind of found out that there were a lot of dualities in my heritage on both sides of what now we have as a border. And so when I look at my Mexican cuisine and the Mexican food that I grew up in, it's that low and slow cooking that everybody loves. It brings so much flavor, brings so much passion to it. And I was seeing that taking place on both sides. And food was really that centric, space for me to be able to really bring both of those together and understand, oh, they're not so different after all.
So it sounds like food has always played a really big role in your life, and you really embraced it as a part of your upbringing. Because I know a lot of people, whether it's food or a different form of creativity, they sort of grew into it or they discovered it later in life. But it seems like it played a really big role since you were born, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. On my father's side, there was always, opportunities to jump in and help out in the kitchen. But on my native side, it was one of those things that you kind of have to grow into. And you always see the aunties and the mothers and the grandmothers like really like doing all the hardcore cooking. And sometimes maybe you're just in the way or you don't really see the importance of joining in and you're young. So things kind of set in at a later time for me. But on my Mexican side of the family, it was like, there's so many cousins, there's so many family members, and we bring neighbors in from, across the street to come eat with us. And so it had to be like all hands on deck, like full force as a family contributing to that. And so growing up with, that kind of that responsibility, it was just always like I saw the importance of family coming together, cooking. My grandmother at one point owned a restaurant. I had two uncles that owned restaurants. And so seeing them in that food space and have that passion was something that, was always there when I was younger, but it didn't really set in as a career choice until later on.
Sure. And I think food also became a way for you to tell stories, and it became a language for you to speak and in a way to express identity. So was there a moment when you realized that that's what food became for you, a way to express yourself when maybe words didn't quite fit in?
Yeah, in my early 20s, I found myself really wanting to learn more about the world. And like I mentioned, I didn't do a whole lot of traveling when I was younger. And so when I was in my early 20s, I started realizing that there's this whole world out there. And the best way that I could connect to them was, at least from Kansas, being in Kansas City, the best way that I could connect to the outside world was through food and through culture. And so I would be, around this time, this is where social media really started to boom, and we had the access to see things that were happening across the world that were outside of our bubble. And at least that's the case for me. So when I started seeing different cultures being represented through the art of food, I got really excited about it because, of course, I love food. And I was just like really paying attention to other like cooking techniques and other types of foods that people were, different cultures were eating. And so I got really curious and started implementing some of these recipes in my own kitchen, started kind of inviting people over and hosting dinners. And I remember my plating. And I mean, I look back now as a professional for like over 10 years. I look back at the plating that I was doing, and I thought I was really doing something, and I was like, I'm going to present this so like uniquely and cool for my family, for my friends, to give them an experience. And those were things that really mattered to me at that time. And so that was kind of like the entryway for understanding like, oh, my culture also is a part of that identity of like what I'm choosing in my kitchen. What do I have as staples in my kitchen? So when people come to my home, from like the artwork to like the decor to the feng shui of the room, what is my home and my kitchen and what's at my dinner table saying about who I am as an individual?
Do you remember what your family's reaction or your friends' reaction was when you did that first sort of plating decor?
Yeah, I think everyone was really like just excited to see it. And I was like getting a lot of people like, wow, that looks delicious. Oh, yum, come cook for me and things like that. And so I remember hosting my first Thanksgiving dinner, which now Thanksgiving means something different to me now that I've, kind of moved into this space of understanding who we are as Indigenous people and how we are the original, people of this land. And Thanksgiving is always a controversial subject, obviously, for Indigenous folks. So that moment of being able to host a Thanksgiving, and I cooked everything, and I told everyone, I don't want any help. I want to do this on my own.
That's amazing.
And yeah, and I had everyone, over at my house. And so for me and my family can say that was kind of like the moment where they were really taking it serious. And so was I. And they were just like, wow, she's really passionate about this. And the food was great. And everyone was raving about what I had on the table. So that was kind of a moment that people kind of started realizing like, oh, okay, yeah, there's something here with her.
Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned Thanksgiving specifically, only because that was a very formative moment for you in terms of growing into what you wanted to do and having people witness that what you're doing is very passionate and amazing food. At the same time, I think perhaps maybe earlier in your childhood, there was another formative moment related to Thanksgiving when one of your teachers was explaining the origins of Thanksgiving. And it sounded like her retelling of the events didn't quite square with the history that you knew. So can you describe, what were they saying and how did you respond to what was happening at the time?
What is depicted in curriculums across, different school systems in our school system in America, the truth is always very, how could you say, they put it in a very nice way, of what happened when settlers came in and began to remove Indigenous people from their ancestral lands. And it was just harmonious Thanksgiving dinner. And the introduction was this very friendly encounter and thing that happened. And I knew the real story of that, obviously, because of my family and the storytelling aspect of our culture. So that story was told time and time again. And also there's a lot of traumas and generational trauma that is passed down. And so those removals added so much pressure and harm to our Native American people. And my tribe specifically, being Potawatomi, we are displaced here there in Kansas and Maida, Kansas, like our reservations in Maida, Kansas, but that is not our ancestral land. We migrated down through what's called the Trail of Death. And so me knowing that story and understanding how hard that was for my ancestral lineage, and then to hear someone, and even at a young age, I was in fifth grade when this happened, and then hearing this other side of the story of how it was so harmonious and like these relationships were so, it was something to be respected, that these folks came in and had this like really great encounter and it was friendly. And I was just like, hey, let me give you a perspective. This is actually not what I know to believe. And, my teacher was like, because I was like I'm also Mexican American. So I was dressing as my other, classmates that were also Mexican, the way that we did our hair. And, like that was something that I presented myself like very like leaning towards my Mexican side at that age. And also it's like weird with identity and the way we dress and look and things of that nature, which is a different topic. But at that time I was really, a young person figuring my own self out. But during that conversation, she mentioned, well, aren't you Mexican? Like, what do you mean you're Native American? Kind of just questioning my own identity. And that really like confused me at the time, because I was like, people can be both things. People can be multicultural, but from a standpoint of someone that's an educator, that's in this authoritative position, telling me about my own lineage and my own heritage and my own identity was really, really confusing at that time.
Well, and as you mentioned, you were a very young person at that moment. So I can't imagine what was going through your mind when you have someone in that position to question you that way, but you spoke up. Especially as an adult right now, when you think back, how important was it for you to realize that you were able to speak up for yourself in that moment?
We talk about, having this inner fire, which I have a cookbook, Rooted in Fire, that tells a lot about this story of being kind of like this adolescent person that, child that had a lot of energy and just had a lot of emotions. And at a young age, I didn't really know how to channel that in a positive way. And I grew up with three older brothers. So I was just kind of always kind of like fighting my way to be in a place, in a space where I was with my siblings, able to go join them and their fun that they were having with their friends. But they're just like, oh no, you're a girl. Like you get to stay back and stay home with mom. And I was always just kind of fighting my way into my own circle of friends and my siblings. And so when we talk about channeling that, even like as now as adult, at that time I was just like trying to figure out, who I am as an individual, but also like where I fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And so that fire is kind of been something that has definitely carried me throughout my life. And channeling that was something that was important for me at a young age. And I figured that out around the age of 15. But yeah, it was just that passion that was like really set in. And I give my identity or my heritage kind of the responsibility for that, if you will. If you think about
Mm-hmm.
if you think about your identity as like an ancestral thing, and it's a legacy and the things that my ancestors went through, and just figuring out my own parents, the way that they act, and the way that we are at home, we're just very passionate people, and the way that we are in the kitchen are very passionate people. And finding an outlet for that was really important as I got older. And that's kind of where, my fire, my passion roots from, is just, I've always been this person to speak out about myself. I've always been this person to stand up for myself because I quite literally had to in my family.
Well, we're going to continue with this fire conversation after a quick break. You're listening to Piet Despain, who's a chef, author, and winner of Gordon Ramsay's cooking competition, Next Level Chef. Piet will stay with us after our short break. And listeners, we would love to hear from you. Let us know if you bring your heritage into your dishes, and how do you do so? Share a favorite recipe with us. Find us on Facebook or Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. For Piet Despain, a nationally recognized chef with roots in Mexican and Native American culture, food and heritage go hand in hand. She joins us this hour to talk about her culinary journey, one that took her from homelessness to winning Gordon Ramsay's cooking competition, Next Level Chef. So, Piet, I would love to dig into your time, of course, on Gordon Ramsay's show. But before we do, would love to talk about your own career trajectory leading up to that moment, and including a time where you were struggling and actually became homeless. What was that period like, and what were you able to do to pull you through?
Yeah, that time was very rough as being, a young woman in the heart of Los Angeles. I lived in Hollywood, California at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm far away from home.
Right.
And I found myself at this point where I was, the easiest thing I could have done was turn back and go back to Kansas and, move in with my parents and figure life out, all over again. But during that time frame of my life, I was just trying to build my business. And I had this, this really big goal of mine, which I never knew if that goal was going to take me. But my goal was just to be a successful private chef and to eventually land a high paying client that I could go in and be as creative as I want, and, work for someone that was within like some kind of film industry or maybe a pop star or something.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be a private chef working for someone substantial. And I never saw myself being the person that was going to be in the limelight. But at that moment, when I had this very pivotal decision that I had to make, I remember specifically giving my mom a call, and just the realization of, wow, I'm actually homeless in the heart of Los Angeles. What am I going to do? I gave my mother a phone call, and I was thinking out loud as her and I were kind of just processing this together. And I was like, I have no home. I have nowhere that is my home. I have all of my clothes in the trunk of my car, and I have a cat. Like, what am I going to do? And of course, my mother, being the supportive mother and worried about her daughter in the heart of California, is, you can always come home. What are you doing? Just come home. And for me, that was a decision I was not able to make, because there's just so much of that fuel and that passion, that fire that was really driving my career and driving my choices. And I wanted so much more for myself, and I just didn't want to give that up yet. And I knew as long as I'm waking up every morning with this burning desire to head full force into my goals, I have to stick around. I have to figure out what the next step is. Luckily, at this time, I had some friends in Los Angeles that were allowing me to stay on their couches. So I was couch surfing. And I remember working multiple jobs, just trying to make ends meet and trying to save money. And I was, switching out I remember specifically being in the parking lot of a CVS and switching out my work clothes from one job to the other, popping my trunk open, changing right there in the parking lot super quickly, like putting my uniform on to go work a catering gig. And that was just something that I had to push through, and I had to really, come up with a game plan. So my game plan was to take on as many jobs as I could, save as much money as I could, and find myself into rooms and conversations of opportunity. And that was a very pivotal time in my moment. And homelessness is not something that was foreign to me. Growing up with a single mother with 3 children, we have found ourselves in women's shelters before, and couch surfing also with family members. Like, I come from a background of being resilient, being strong, bouncing back. And one of my other biggest, I guess you would say, like, life lessons was learning how to lean on people and accept the help, because there's so much shame around failing and, oh, I failed. I've put myself in this situation. What am I doing? And instead of looking at it in that term of failure, I looked at it in a sense of, okay, this is a rebuilding phase. This is when I get to put one brick on top of the other and build a solid foundation of supporters and friends that will be here for me. And eventually there's going to be a time where I can, in return do that for them. So I had to really switch my perspective from that fight or flight mode to, okay, let's rebuild.
Well, and it's an amazing experience to listen to, and thank you so much for sharing that, because it feels like one of those moments of, it's something you're really passionate about. So if you're not passionate about it, you're probably not going to do all of the things that you did to get there, because it's not something that everyone can do, right? And I kind of want to go back a little bit to earlier when you mentioned that food was not something that you ever thought that you will want as your job or as your career. So when did that moment happen for you, when you realized this is something that you want to take into as a career? And because you did eventually become a private chef, and it really took off.
That moment for me was a simple suggestion from a friend. And I was living in Kansas City, and a friend who I really looked up to, she had been someone very inspirational to me. She was she's older than me, and just seeing the way that she developed her life, and she had her family. I really admired her being this really strong motherly figure, but also had her career and was like very focused on that. And so her words held a lot of weight in my life, still do to this day. She's an amazing friend, but she recommended culinary school as, something to look into and to research. And at the time I was thinking, what am I going to do in culinary school? I had been a college dropout at this point, and I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. So I was working all these different types of jobs, and I was in the automotive industry doing pretty well for myself as a business developing manager for an automotive group. And this kind of seemed like, oh, this was the answer. I'm making great money. And although I don't have to have a college education, I'm still making, a living. And I was making more money than both of my parents had even made their whole lives. And I thought, okay, I've made it. This is great. But there was this, something was definitely missing from that for me. And when I thought about the trajectory of my career, I asked myself, okay, what's the next step after I've master this part of my career? What is to come after this? And I did not like the way that roadmap looked for me. And there was no passion in it. It was just a 9-to-5 job, sitting behind a computer, managing people, crunching numbers, driving sales. And that was just not something I was super passionate about after working in that industry for 3 years. And when she mentioned culinary school, I was thinking, there's no way I'm going to be a chef.
Right.
I saw my family members really struggle with their businesses, and I saw how hard it was to maintain that. And so I was like, I really wrote it off, and I was like, I don't think that's for me. And there was this moment one day I was on my day off and I was just flipping through the channels, relaxing on the couch and watching TV. And there was a commercial that came on the local television channel that was advertising for this local culinary school, and they were advertising for tours. So I got curious. I called the number, signed up to do a tour the next day, did the tour. Something clicked. And it was something that I had never felt before. It was this feeling of, you have to do this. It was this like green light bulb moment, the aha, if you will, that Oprah Winfrey talks about.
Right.
And I ended up signing up for culinary courses that same day. So here I am. I'm now locked in to this culinary course, and I now have to find funding, and I'm starting school in 3 weeks. And so that was that like, okay, this is it. We're going to do this. We got to jump right into it. Because I knew if I didn't jump into it, then it was never going to happen.
Well, talk about a literal sign that came to you from the TV screen, but you still had to grab onto that moment, right? No one's going to do that for you, and there's so many questions in between then and now. But I want to fast forward a little bit because your career as a private chef really did take off. In 2021, you were named one of the top 25 best private chefs in Los Angeles by Entrepreneur magazine. So when did the next level chef opportunity come up for you, and what was going through your head when you applied for that?
Yeah, so I have another amazing friend who and I went to high school with, and he's also still a really good friend to this day. He was really pushing for me to do TV stuff. And he's like, you need to be on TV. You have this like great look and this great personality. And I was just like, no, I don't want to be on TV. But as I started going through culinary school, obviously everyone saw I was super passionate about that. He said, okay, this is your moment. You're going to do a cooking show. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do a cooking show. So he actually secretly signed up for me for MasterChef. Because I was classically trained at this point, I was not eligible for that show. I still did an interview with them. And from his, recommendations and guidance, that kind of threw my name out into the circuit of TV shows. While that was simultaneously circulating without my knowledge, I was working. I had moved to LA at this point. I'm working towards my goals. I was going through all the struggles of being a private chef, and I landed a really awesome, a few awesome gigs where I was able to travel to Hawaii and be a private chef for a luxury traveling company for families. So I had the opportunity of this budget that didn't exist. And I was able to really like dive in and work with all these like local ingredients in Hawaii. And it was such an amazing opportunity. And so that was really where I was when I got the phone call from the casting people from that department. And they were, just like, hey, would you be interested in this? I'm just like, how did you get my information? Mm. But they were like, yeah, your name's been circulating, behind the scenes kind of throughout these casting teams. And as a director, I came across and I thought, wow, this is a really great opportunity for you. And I did get a call like earlier that year to do an interview and to get casted for Hell's Kitchen. And I said no, because as a chef at that moment, I was not prepared to take on being on TV. And that's nothing that I saw myself doing at that time. I was just really focused on being that successful private chef that I was working towards. And so when I was in Hawaii working my dream job, and during that time frame I get the call, I finally felt ready to take on that opportunity as a chef. And when they kind of explained to me the gist of the show, they couldn't give too many details, but they were like, yeah, there's private chefs, professional chefs, home cooks, people at various different levels competing against each other. So it could really go your way if you really, work hard and you do well in the competition and so forth. So when I got that call, I dropped everything that I was doing, ran and did the interview 2 hours later after receiving the call. And then I got a call maybe 3 days later saying, hey, you've been casted. We want you on the show. So doing all of the background checks and all of the things, the formalities, within 1 week of getting that phone call and getting on a plane to fly out of state to go film for the show. It happened so quickly and so fast. And it was just really a surreal moment. And I couldn't believe how fast it had happened. But that's the showbiz for you.
You're a literal meme. That's showbiz, baby. And
that's showbiz, baby.
Well, and it feels like that you have so many moments in your life that it feels like it met this moment. As you mentioned earlier, you were born in a family where you were built your resiliency, you were adapting well because of all of the challenges that you've had to go through. Perhaps another person would not have been able to. And more fast forwarding here because we're having such a good time and don't have that much time left. You were the winner of Next Level Chef, which is such an amazing achievement. So did it feel like a full circle moment going from someone struggling to find their identity to someone representing Indigenous and Mexican heritage on national television?
Yeah, it was a moment when I first took on that position, and the casting of being, okay, I'm the last person. I knew I was the last person that got casted because that's what they told me. And I didn't think I really stood a chance, to be honest. I was just going on the show for quote unquote the clout. And I said, oh, I'm going to be on a Gordon Ramsay show. And, once I had, a friend who unfortunately passed away during my filming. It was literally the first day that I was there filming on set, and I got the call that night. So I almost didn't stay on the show. But after a conversation with my mom, I was really struggling with, just the mourning process, and I was grieving, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to stick around here. How am I going to go and compete on this show while I have this on my mind and on my heart? And my mother just really had to talk me into staying on the show. And she said something to me that really stuck with me. And it was, this is your opportunity to, not only make a name for yourself, but represent us and your family and your community and do it for us, because my family and my friends, as you can tell from the story, the trajectory of all of the support systems around me really uplifting me to this point. And I was more focused on myself in that moment and not really representing them, because I'm like, oh, this is my opportunity. But when she said that, I realized this is my opportunity to showcase that support and that community that I have. And that's when it really clicked for me that I'm going to show up and I'm going to represent something, and I'm going to do it to my fullest capability, because I don't know how much time I'll have here on this show. So that was a turning point for me. So any opportunity I got to represent my community and talk about, Native American culture and food, and being this multicultural person, and how there's so much duality in that and the beauty of it. And I really wanted to break a lot of stereotypes, because here I am as an Indigenous woman in this position that's never really happened before. So I didn't take it lightly from that point forward. And I really just dug into that authenticity of who I am, what I represent, who my community is. And obviously that authenticity is what drove my success on that show.
You've been listening to Chef Piet Despain. She's the winner of Gordon Ramsay's reality TV competition, Next Level Chef, in 2022. And after the break, we're talking cake. You'll hear our conversation with Dorie Greenspan, 5-time James Beard Award winner and celebrated cookbook author. Stay with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Cakes are not just for birthdays, and if you have some for breakfast, there's no judgment in this space at all, as our guest today, celebrated cookbook author Dorie Greenspan, knows that as well. Her latest book, Dorie's Anytime Cakes, celebrates the art of a good, unfussy cake to be baked with or without a special occasion. So, Dorie, we were talking about earlier how you have a lot of your stories before recipes, and you've also sprinkled a lot of your own personal lessons and takeaways from baking throughout the book. So one that stood out to us was actually an anecdote about baking for your son's first birthday, and being reminded that baking is supposed to be a joy and not a stressor. So can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
So I think anyone who's baked or who's had a child turn one, it's a crazy time in your life, right? You're juggling so much. And for our son Joshua's first birthday, I made a cake, but I barely remember. I mean, I remember the cake, I baked a cake. It was a coconut cake. Don't ask me why I thought coconut was right for a 1-year-old. And I baked cookies for all the little kids that came. I remember nothing about the party I was so focused on a million jobs and the cake. And in the book, I write about getting a second chance because I have 2 granddaughters, Gemma, who's 5, and Vivi, who's 3 now, and being able to bake first birthday cakes for them, and what it felt like. It felt like a special gift that I was giving in some ways selfishly to myself because I had the chance to really focus on them. And I think when we bake, whether it's baking for a birthday, if we're baking for someone, it's an act almost of meditation, or I've always wanted to keep a journal. I never have. But I feel like when I'm baking for someone, in my mind, I'm thinking about that person, the experience I've had with them. It's almost like a little reread of a journal. And I feel like that's those special times when we're baking for someone special, they stand apart. However, I never made a fancy cake that's not true. I made a Darth Vader cake for Joshua's 4th birthday.
Wow, that's fancy.
I even made that was fancy. I remember very well. I've made all kinds of fancy cakes with buttercream roses. But when it came time to make first birthday cakes for my granddaughters, and they're in the book, they were simple.
Well, it's very much like what you were saying earlier, too, where I think every food item you make, there's a story behind it. There's a memory behind it. And it sounds like this is very similar, right, where you incorporate the experience into the dessert that you're making and talking about perfection or being so in your head about having to do the thing and then making sure everyone is happy and serving all the cakes and the cookies. Whenever we talk about cooking of all kinds, the idea of perfection seems to always come in. Why do you think we're obsessed with this idea of being perfect in the kitchen?
I think I don't. I've been there, and I can still return to that spot. It's not a happy place. I wonder if because now we have so many cooking competitions and baking competitions, and we're seeing people being, go home because your cake isn't perfect. I think it's raised the bar. I think it's made people more interested in baking, which I love. But perfection, who's perfect? I feel like I would rather have a cake that has someone's thumbprint, either literally or figuratively, in the cake than a perfect cake. I want to see someone's hands at work. I want to feel that someone has put some heart into what they're baking. I think perfection is so overrated. Overrated.
I actually usually like the bread, let's say, the one that's like wonky looking, because there's so much more character to it, to me.
Character, personality. And I worry that when we're striving for perfection, when we think that the dish that we've cooked has to be put on our best plate and arranged the way we saw it in a restaurant, or that the frosting on the cake has to be absolutely flat, I think we're taking away the pleasure that comes from working with our hands and making something and then sharing it.
And Dory, as we've been talking about experimenting and having fun in the kitchen and how perfection is so overrated. And so it seems like you've always had a bit of a risk-taking spirit. And pursuing baking was a bit of a risk for you when you were first starting out, right? It wasn't your first career path.
Well, given that I burned my parents' kitchen down when I was in 7th grade, It was really unlikely that I was going to turn out to be a cook or a baker. And I learned to cook and bake. Oh, yeah, that was that first bread that I made that was like a hockey puck. But I learned to cook and bake because I got married to Michael. We're still married when I was 19 years old. And I wanted to learn. And he was really very patient. My mother once said, "You're so lucky you married a man who would think salad is okay for dinner." So he would eat anything that I made. I was a student, so I had plenty of time to cook. And yeah, I really wanted to. And so much of what I made wasn't good.
Well, and I love the sort of the origin story for that is there's a sense of curiosity and a desire to learn. And that's something that
Yes.
we were talking about earlier because you also found your passion for food writing. And then in the summer of 1995, you actually spent the summer in Julia Child's kitchen and
Yes.
striking up a friendship with her. So what an amazing experience. Tell us about that time in your life and what did she teach you?
Everything. She was so Julia Child. She's fabulous. I mean, she was the embodiment of curiosity. She was interested in everything. So I worked with her in Cambridge when we were filming, and it was filmed then, the Baking with Julia series for PBS. And then I wrote the book. And Julia really thought of herself. She never called herself a chef, even though she was on a program called The French Chef. She always said she was a home cook or a home baker, and she really was a teacher. She really wanted to teach people what things to do in the kitchen. And one day, we were talking about how we're always interested in things before we were on air. And one day Julia and I played hooky from the shoot, and we went to a supermarket, which was Julia's idea of fun. And out of the clear blue sky, she said to me, "We're so lucky. We're lucky that we work in food because it means we'll never stop learning." And I just think that when you're really interested in any subject, you have the possibility of constantly learning. There's a recipe in my new book that I've learned about in Greece. It was my first time in Greece, and we were leaving the little guest house, and the woman in the kitchen, the server said, "Don't leave without taking a piece of this cake. You have to," and she knew I was interested in sweets. "You have to try it." And I loved the cake. It was an orange cake. And when I got back home, I kept looking for the cake. I had never tasted anything like it. The cake is made with dried phyllo dough. There's no flour. You dry the phyllo dough in the oven. You kind of pleat it up, dry it, scrunch it between your fingers, and use that as the binding agent in the cake. And I was so excited. The cake is well known all over Greece. I'm sure that most people with Greek heritage know this cake, but it was brand new to me, and the idea of using phyllo. And I thought, this is why I love baking, because Julia was right. There's always something new to learn. We'll always be learning.
Well, and I think you already answered my next question, but there's so much here to dig into, I feel, because your career trajectory is so filled with joy and twists and turns and also with decades of experience. Do you ever find it difficult to keep coming up with new and fresh ideas, or are those really moments where you lean into curiosity and you know what, you're going to try this thing? Maybe it doesn't happen, but who cares?
Such an interesting question, because I've done two books that we call them single subject. So I did a cookie book and this cake book. And both times I was worried that I wouldn't have enough ideas to stay within the box that I had created for myself. It would be cookies. It would be simple cakes. And I found, and this has just helped me in every other field. I found that in some ways, the narrower the focus, the constraints that you put on yourself, I will make just cookies, I will make just simple cakes, the more ideas you have, because you're really focused on one thing. So that when I was working on Anytime Cakes, everything began to look like a cake. I had cake on my mind. I had this wonderful cookie in Paris, and I thought, oh, it's a great cookie, but I can turn it into a cake. And so I cakeified this poppy seed, cranberry rye cookie. It's the idea spins. You can't always, and I'm sure this is true in every field. I know it's certainly true in my writing. You can't always just snap your fingers and say, new idea, I need a new idea. But when you're really involved in something, the ideas come.
Well, I think it's kind of like what you were mentioning earlier too, where you find inspiration anywhere, right? And in anything. You see a cookie and you're like, that can be a cake. I mean, I'm assuming you see a chair and you're like, I can turn that into a cake. I'm looking at a chair right now and I'm thinking that, Dory, if anyone can turn that into a cake, it's gonna be Dory. Do you find that new challenge for Dory? Do you find that sense of the idea, inspiration, or the sense of curiosity or imagination, does it leave the kitchen and follow you wherever you go?
I think in different ways. What a question. What a question, Catherine. Yeah, I think in different ways. I think I once thought, travel would be more interesting if I collected something. And because then I would have something to look for, like a treasure hunt. And I set my mind on spoons. I thought small, didn't work. But it always works when it's food. And so it makes, as you're looking for that cookie that you heard some baker made, in the next town, you're looking at everything else as well, and you're meeting people. I think I'm very lucky to be a curious person. I just want to know. And so, yes, it helps me. It is what makes it possible for me to create new recipes and to write new stories. But I think I think we all have that spark.
You've been listening to Dory Greenspan, celebrated cookbook author, and her latest work, Dory's Anytime Cakes, is available now. We hope you enjoyed this listen back to some of our favorite Where We Live conversations with chefs, and we hope we inspired you to dig out those baking sheets and gather around some homemade deliciousness this holiday season. Happy Thanksgiving. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Chloe Wynn. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. Thank you all so much for listening, and happy cooking, everyone.